Resuming a debate, the Honourable Member for York Simcoe.
Here.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, when I look at the economic situation impacting Canadians right across this country, I can't help but wonder, have this Prime Minister never entered politics and had a more regular upbringing, typical of most Canadians, he would very likely be cutting it on a drama teacher's salary. If he were, could he afford to live under the very same policies and economic conditions he's imposing on Canadians today? Under these circumstances, I can't help but wonder how the Prime Minister, if he were not Prime Minister, could stretch his budget to cover feeding his family, clothing, mortgage payments, car expenses, cell phone bills, and all the other obligations facing ordinary and the truly who are extraordinary Canadians. But we know that the actual circumstances of this Prime Minister are far different than the circumstances facing most people across the country. He doesn't know what it's like to struggle to put food on the table or gas in the car. But Canadians are doing this all the while going about their daily lives. Increasingly, more Canadians are paying attention to what is taking place in Ottawa and what this government is doing, because they must. They can no longer go about their lives without being directly confronted and negatively affected by the actions and failures of this Liberal government. This is because everything is broken in Canada under this Prime Minister. There has been a record 2 million food bank visits in a single month. Housing costs have doubled. Mortgage payments are 150% higher than they were before the Liberals formed government. Canada has been warned it is the most at-risk country in the G7 for a mortgage default crisis. Violent crime is up 39%. 10 encampments can be found in most major cities. Over 50% of Canadians are $200 or less away from going broke. Average household debt makes up 100% of Canadians' income. Business insolvencies have increased by 37% this year. Despite our growth in population, there are fewer entrepreneurs and fewer new businesses than ever. This is the day-to-day reality facing Canadians because of the generational high inflation and the fastest rise in interest rates in Canadian monetary history. An issue the Prime Minister says, if you recall, he doesn't think about. But regular people do. Every single person living in this country has been impacted by rising costs, homelessness amid an unaffordable home ownership and rental market, not to mention rampant crime, a destabilized society where basic government services, travel, medical care, and so much more has become inaccessible, unreliable, or non-existent. Canadians know that this Liberal government caused this misery with rampant overspending, a record $600 billion of inflationary debt, and countless tax hikes that increase the price of the goods we buy and drives up the interest we pay. But now Canadians look to the federal government and the Prime Minister, who is responsible for everything being broken, to see what's being done to tackle these issues. And they see this, Madam Speaker, the 2023 Liberal Fall Economic Statement. Talk about a day late and a dollar short. They didn't implement any of the common sense proposals Conservatives called for to address the problems facing our country's citizens. Instead, the Liberals are forcing $20 billion of new spending on Canadians that will further drive up taxes, inflation, and interest rates. Never before has a federal government spent so much with so little to show for it. And now Canadians are paying the price. In fact, Liberal policies in the economic statement only make the problems piling up in our country so much worse. The Liberals are now spending more on interest than debt than they are in health care. Think about that, Madam Speaker. It's no wonder York Simcoe still doesn't have a hospital. When justifying the failure of economic statement, the Deputy Prime Minister said, quote, "Canada is not and has never been broken." Can you believe that? Canadians are paying attention, and they're being told by the Deputy Prime Minister, who is tasked with tackling this issue, that actually there aren't any. She says everything is fine. Canadians have never had it so good. We shouldn't be surprised. This is the same Deputy Prime Minister who spends thousands on limos while bragging she doesn't need to own a car. She can just walk out the door and get on a subway. This is the same finance minister who is holding back the rural top-up fund from the carbon tax, from the First Nations in my riding and from my riding in York Simcoe, forcing them to pay more in carbon tax simply because of where they live, dividing based on geography. She'll pretend that a AAA credit rating matters, as if it will fill the stomachs of Canadians lined up at food banks. It doesn't matter to her that this rating is only maintained on the backs of Canadians through higher taxes and interest rates. She'll also brag that Canada supposedly has the lowest debt and deficit in the G7. But she ignores the fact that when you account for general government debt, federal, provincial, territorial, Canada has the 10th highest debt to GDP burden in the OECD. With this economic statement, the Liberals would have you believe that because the federal debt is only 42% of our GDP, it's all good. But the truth is, the government debt is 113% of our GDP when you account for all of it. The Liberals' refusal to admit that Canada is broken, that the people in this country are suffering, and that a change of course is necessary, proves to Canadians without a shadow of a doubt that this government is out of touch, incapable of responding to the crises they've made. And there are crises. Just look at the headlines from the past few months. Canada's worst financial crisis in generations is brewing. Federal efforts to solve Canada's housing crisis is failing. Surgery backlogs, no family doctors, Canada's health care crisis. There are so many more covering affordability, opioids, foreign interference, food insecurity, mental health, crisis after crisis after crisis. After 8 years, Canadians have never been more unhappy, more uncomfortable, and more unsafe. This economic statement proves that the biggest crisis facing this country, and the root of all others, is a crisis of leadership. The approach of this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberal government is not working. Prices are up, rent's up, debt's up, taxes are up. Well, time's up. Canada is broken. And the only people who will not admit that are the very same people who caused it. This tired, corrupt, and out-of-touch Liberal government. There is a better way. Conservatives will axe the tax, balance the budget to bring down inflation and interest rates to bring home lower prices for Canadians. In a Canada no longer defined by crisis. We can only speculate what could have been if the Prime Minister was never Prime Minister. I'm confident that we won't need to wait much longer before the Prime Minister is not the Prime Minister anymore. And with the many issues facing our country and the repeated failures by this government to address them, what will his legacy be? It is increasingly looking like he will forever be remembered as the Prime Minister who broke Canada. Instead of our out-of-touch policies, we need a vision for a country and a Prime Minister who believes in Canadians the way Canadians believe in their country. The Leader of the Opposition will be that Prime Minister, and Conservatives will axe the tax, fix the budget.
And we have to go to questions and comments.